All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, John. And hello, everyone, and welcome to Kind's first ever Google Hangout interview, where we get to speak with John Lemacks from Tafapolsky and Smith in Los Angeles. John has been with Tafapolsky since 2012 and took on his first pro bono Kind case in 2013. For the past year, John has worked with his client, Jose, to help him through his immigration case, where in 2014, he found out that Jose's asylum application was granted. John has now taken on another Kind pro bono case. Thank you so much for being with us today, John, and so let's get started. Can you at least describe your role on the issue and your relationship with Kind?
Sure, thanks. First of all, thanks for the honor. Tafapolsky and Smith has had a relationship with Kind for several years. That predates my joining the firm. So when I joined the firm, the opportunity and the support was already there. So I was just happy to be a part of the process. And I was the pro bono attorney that handled a asylum case for an unaccompanied minor that came over from El Salvador shortly after he turned 16 years old.
So, and then can you explain kind of what aspects of the issue resonate most with you, so and with the legal community?
Sure. I think for me, the vulnerability of the children and the hardships that they face was probably the biggest factor for me. A lot of these kids are abandoned by their parents and have to go through a horrific journey to get here to the United States. So the thought of, after all those hardships, having to go through the legal process, immigration process, the court, or the administrative process in immigration without counsel is something that I think a lot of lawyers feel strongly about.
Great. And what root causes for the influx of unaccompanied minors have you seen in your casework?
Well, that's a great question. I think with El Salvador, historically, it's always been a violent country with ties to the United States, and I think a lot of the gangs that are currently in El Salvador still have ties to the United States. A lot of those individuals were family members of immigrants that came over after the Civil War who were later deported to El Salvador. So I think you have a rise in the number of gangs coupled with the inability of the state, the local police, to protect the public from these gangs. And then you just add on poverty, abandonment, and family reunification. A lot of these kids, their parents come to the United States seeking a better life, so these gang members will sort of use that in their marketing tactics, and they do have some very extensive smuggling routes, as well as I would say, as well as a misconception of immigration laws that would be the sort of the primary drivers of immigration to the United States.
Great. And going off of that, I was wondering if you could share briefly Jose's story and why he fled to the United States and what it was like meeting him for the first time.
Well, sure. I think meeting Jose for the first time was it was exciting at first. He was I remember being just being struck by how young he looked. Although he was 17 when we started developing our relationship and started discussing the case issues, he just looked so young. So that was one of the first things that struck me. So Jose was abandoned by his father at a young age. His mom left him when he was 9, and he was raised by his maternal grandmother in El Salvador, who was a very religious woman, and so he was raised in a religion that is sort of a minority in El Salvador. Mm-hmm. So when he started junior high, he was essentially targeted by gang members, and they tried to recruit him into the gang. And on account of his religion, he was unable to join these gangs. He was unable to be friends with them, and so they would start stalking him. They would harass him. They would threaten him. They threatened his grandmother. They physically beat him, all on account of his religious beliefs. They also ridiculed him because he wouldn't have a girlfriend, so they would make fun of his perceived sexual orientation because he didn't have a girlfriend because his religion prevented him from doing so.
Wow. And what would you say the biggest lesson learned or personal growth moment during this process?
You know, I think for me was the fact that the system still works. You know, the camaraderie that we all felt here in LA really got us moving. On a more personal note, I think after Jose started opening up to us, it just became very apparent that he was just a regular kid. And I have a couple of goofball nephews that I love to death, and the thought of them having to go through such a horrific ordeal, the hardships of coming over, and then having to go through a legal process without representation is something that just reinvigorated everyone here, I think.
Definitely. And my last and final question, why is it important for attorneys to engage as advocates for pro bono issues such as vulnerable unaccompanied children?
Sure, that's a good question. I think protecting the public and the vulnerable is something that every attorney should be looking at. Here at Taffa and Smith, part of our practice includes assisting underserved communities, and I think that sometimes it's a daunting task to take on a pro bono case, especially attorneys. Their day-to-day gigs, although they can differ, we're busy, and the thought of taking another case that could potentially end up in court is a little overwhelming. But I guarantee that the rewards are just great, and that your practice will be better for it. And it's just a great opportunity, and we're really happy to have been of service in this case.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, John. And we will be in touch soon, and keep in touch with Kind next month for our other Pro Bono Attorney of the Month features. Thank you.